The present, falling for Eve. You will not surely die. The serpent. Perception, deception. The lie, the curse, the fall. Fierce faith. The faith, the mirror, the redemption. Shadows reflect free will. To bite the fruit is to know duality, the presence of love and the absence of love. The absence of love casts a shadow because the presence of love is still around the corner. Yet, something is blocking the receiver from absorbing love the way a shadow casted upon an object reflects the inability of that object to receive sunlight. Currently, the absence of love is felt through a metaphysical phenomenon called the shadow. A shadow is not the complete absence of love because a shadow is only able to cast through the presence of love. Without light, there are no shadows. It would just be void, an abyss. Fortunately, the presence of light is still around despite its inability to reach the receiver because of a blockage we sometimes call the ego. Still, the presence of the shadow is good because it reflects the presence of free will, which means every divine matter has the ability to choose the presence and absence of love in every present perfect opportunity of being. There are two types of shadows, noble and alchemized. The noble shadow is good because it is unreactive and contained within the individual without manifesting action in reality. An alchemized shadow, on the other hand, is bad because it is reactive and projective, thus proving itself to become quite harmful. Properties of an alchemized shadow: a statement based on a lie, a false statement that can sound good but isn't true, or a false statement that is bad but isn't accurate. Active separating between two divine matters in love in the present progressive tense, since it casts itself in shame and blame from divine matter A containing the shadow to divine matter B who is now being projected upon, the contained, with the shadow divine matter A actually carries. What happened in the fall of Eve was that after she had bitten the fruit of knowledge, knowing good and evil, she became aware of Satan, the alchemized shadow of Lucifer, the part of Lucifer that acted in ways that were based on a lie. After Eve bit the fruit of knowledge, she discovered that she had indeed traded a have to be like God for a have not will be like God. She had forgotten her original why, as in why she had bitten the fruit in the first place. Remember, Eve had the simple faith that God will surely not let her die. Instead, Eve's shadow eye awakened, and this newfound power pivoted her focus from her faith in God's goodness to her fear in Satan's deceit. Pre-fall Eve knew she was made in the image of God. Fallen Eve took on the identity of Satan's projection of her based on an alchemized shadow that originated when Lucifer's noble shadow, I doubt God's goodness, was manipulated into God doubts my goodness, the alchemized shadow that led to a series of life lies, such as both Eve and Lucifer are fundamentally broken, fallen short of God's perfect creation. That's why it's called the fall, because Eve's alchemized shadow of herself now mirrors Lucifer's alchemized shadow of himself, fallen short of perfection, perpetually flawed, imperfect, and never good enough before all of God's creation in heaven. The actuality of both her and Lucifer's creative form is already perfection, but their perception of their respective realities is that they are not perfect because of the self-awareness of the shadow that exists within themselves, not realizing that the existence of the noble shadow is actually part of the present perfect state of being as it integrates free will, which is a fundamental property of true love. However, pre-fall Eve's original faith in God's goodness still stands in the present progressive form and tense. Her original pre-fall state had staked her all-in bet on God's goodness and love. Fallen Eve could not have predicted that God will redeem both her and all her offspring one day. Fallen Eve forgotten that her original investment was a winning bet, despite the fact that her biting did in fact cause her to die, because the alchemized shadow state is reactive based on a lie, and the actions taken on this lie manifest evil, which leads to death. However, her original bet in God's goodness still stands true today. 3 good things. Eve's biting caused 3 good things to happen. First, Eve's offspring are capable of becoming self-aware of one's own shadow through a mirror darkly. Second, Eve planted the seed of hope in the heart of darkness by falling with the fallen. In the act of falling, integration of Satan and Lucifer within the snake is now possible. 2 sides to the same coin, shadow and spirit within one body, in hopes of spiritual redemption, the return to the de-alchemized shadow state, from Satan to Lucifer, the one who contains the noble shadow. That hope is possible when duality is acknowledged in the reality within one entity. Third, Eve planted the power of opposition to the alchemized shadow, not. This not is the power of non-action as an action. Eve planted the seed, Adam covered Eve, and now it is up to God to do the rest of the work in answering Lucifer's original question regarding love's goodness. Inside Eve's ability to not die after her death, this paradox of truth and simultaneous untruth is how the completion of shadow integration manifests. This is what Eve's original endgame in her biting the fruit was hoped for. Against its will, all creation was subjected to God's curse, but with eager hope. Romans 8:20, New Living Translation. The serpent's test. God originally commanded Adam not to eat the fruit from the tree of knowledge, but you must not eat from the tree of the knowledge of good and evil, for when you eat from it, you will certainly die. Genesis 2:17, New International Version. When Satan tempted Eve, he switched the position of the not. You will not certainly die, the serpent said to the woman. Genesis 3:4, New International Version. You will not certainly die is testing God's goodness. If love is good, then surely love will not allow love's creation to die, even at the expense of love itself. That is the test. Eve then takes in Lucifer's test, you will not surely die, and affirmed it true, based on Eve's fierce faith in God's goodness. The false negative. Lucifer's test to Eve, you will surely not die, is a false negative statement, which inherently means that a condition exists even though it seems like it doesn't exist. Why was Eve so certain that she will not die? Eve has been gifted the fruit of everlasting life from the tree of life. It is the ability to produce new life. This gift was embedded in her DNA, the extra chromosome that God embedded in Eve that both Adam and Lucifer did not receive. While Lucifer projects love, it is Eve who reflects love. While Lucifer tests love, it is Eve who affirms love. Eve's faith in love's goodness was so simple and intuitive because she embraced that which is already embodied within her. Contrary to popular belief, Eve did not bite the apple because she was envious of the snake's power. She bit because she believed that God will not let her die, because God's love is good. Her eyes were focused on love's goodness. Eve embodied the not in the false negative test, you will surely not die. Eve's faith transforms, you will surely not die, from false into true. At this point of the conversation between pre-fall Eve and the serpent, who embodies the dual nature of Lucifer and Satan, Eve only saw through the spiritual eye. Thus she saw Lucifer, not Satan, because she was not aware of evil. Instead, she answered Lucifer's test in the affirmative. You will certainly not die as true, because she knows that God's goodness will not let her die. Even though she was not aware of evil, she had faith in God's goodness, and that was enough. The timing displacement curse. Contrary to popular belief, the lie is not in Genesis 3:4, you will certainly not die, but in Genesis 3:5, you will be like God. In context to the statement, for God knows that when you eat from it, your eyes will be opened and you will be like God, knowing good and evil. In other words, pre-fall Eve was already like God when the serpent tempted her, before she bit the apple. Like God, she had the power of producing everlasting life. Like God, she chose to focus on goodness in every present perfect moment. Like God, she acts on good. The lie came in the form of a timing displacement curse. A timing displacement curse is switching the timing of one's state of being, I am, in the present perfect moment, with one's state of being, I will be, in the present progressive moment. Satan wants to switch Eve's present perfect state of already being like God for the present progressive state of will be like God. When Satan tempted pre-fall Eve with, you will be like God, she was already like God. Adam and Eve's state of being was immortal, like God, before they bit the fruit from the tree of the knowledge of good and evil. But you must not eat from the tree of knowledge of good and evil, for when you eat from it, you will certainly die. Genesis 2:17, New International Version. When Eve bit the fruit of the tree of knowledge of good and evil, she traded her state of I am like God for her new state of I will be like God. For when you will. A timing displacement curse contains two elements. 1, time, and 2, state of being. This curse is broken down into 3 parts. For when. Part 1, the timing of the incident. Part 2, the state of being before the incident occurs. Part 3, the state of becoming after incident occurs. You will. A timing displacement curse switches one's state of being for I am like in the present perfect tense to I will be like in the present progressive tense. All offspring of fallen Eve are now under the same curse, living in the state of I will be like when X happens rather than I am like in the present perfect moment of being. For when you will. Because the timing displacement curse is still in the present progressive moment, I will be like blank when blank. We are all subjected to the not good enoughs because we base our self-worth on external validations that constantly changes. This is an alchemized shadow state of becoming because it is based on a lie that thing, whatever that thing may be, will make you okay again when in fact that feeling of satisfaction is fleeting once obtained. Once the thing is obtained, the ego moves on to the next thing with the illusion that that next thing will do it for real this time, when in fact that too is fleeting as well. Once obtained, it's time to move on to the next and the next and the next. I will be someone my dad can be proud of when I achieve all my career goals. I will be like a real woman when I find my life partner. I will be worthy of love when I get my driver's license. Ad infinitum. Rather than focus on the internal state of being of pre-fall Eve's I am already like God, a deeper knowing of the internal state that influences the external environment, we now focus on how the external environment can validate our internal state of becoming. I will be like. States of being are activated by an action when you blank. When you eat is the act that activated Eve's present progressive state of dying. By knowing evil, Eve could see clearly Lucifer's shadow of not good enough and Satan's projection of his not good enough onto her. In other words, Eve's ability to see evil had inadvertently given her the ability to assume Satan's alchemized shadow now projected onto her, not good enough. In this case, Eve saw the reason why Satan tempted Eve with the fruit. She was deceived. She saw that she was not smart enough, not wily enough, not sharp enough to see the alchemized shadow Satan and his deception of her. Until after she had bitten, knowing evil, knowing that Satan had bad intentions for her, she saw that he saw that she was not good enough, that Satan wanted her to suffer with him, which is to know the alchemized shadow state of Lucifer. Eve, now knowing evil, could see all of the shadows, both noble and alchemized. Unbeknownst to fallen Eve, however, by falling with Lucifer, Eve had planted the seed of hope in the prophetic will be like God for a possibility that both fallen Lucifer and fallen Eve could arrive at being like God one day. The key to the de-alchemization of Satan back into Lucifer begins with self-awareness of the alchemized shadow state as the alchemized shadow state. That takes a mirror darkly. Here comes fallen Eve as fallen Lucifer's mirror darkly. How in Lucifer and Eve's case? Let's revisit Lucifer's first curse to understand the nature of Eve's curse and how Eve's fall mirrors that of Lucifer's fall. Lucifer's curse is also a positional displacement of timing. Lucifer, I want God's goodness. True. Fallen Lucifer, I have God's goodness. False. Fallen Lucifer's positional displacement of timing is the inverse and opposite valence of fallen Eve's positional displacement of timing. Eve, I have God's goodness. True. Fallen Eve, I will have God's goodness. True. Thereby, fallen Eve embodies the anti-curse of fallen Lucifer's curse. What is a curse? A curse is a noble shadow that has become projected onto another sovereign spirit from the position of where the noble shadow originated from. A curse is the projection of a noble shadow acted out. A curse is also known as an inverted position of the noble shadow. Once the noble shadow is being blamed onto another sovereign being, the shadow becomes an alchemized one for the one who's doing the projecting. When one carries an alchemized shadow, she is highly reactive. However, a noble shadow is not reactive. Noble shadows are not a curse. Noble shadows reflect the presence of free will. A noble shadow is the potential to act against the will of love. Thus, the battleground of spiritual warfare resides in the mind. An alchemized shadow acted out is a curse. In other words, for a curse to wreak havoc and create harmful effects, its position is based on a lie and it must be acted out. Lucifer's curse, noble shadow statement, I doubt God's goodness. True. Inversion of the noble shadow statement, God doubts my goodness. Untrue. Nature is the source of all true knowledge. She has her own logic, her own laws. She has no effect without cause, nor invention without necessity. Leonardo da Vinci. In quantum physics, you are able to transform the quality of matter from negative valence into positive valence, or from positive valence into negative valence based on the conscious choice to shift the perspective of what is. There is so much choice in that space. Thus, the Love Stories program aims to help us deal, reveal, and feel what's so within the mind and heart space. In the realm of thoughts, we process it through creative journaling because that is where the battleground lies and where the integration between shadows and spirits begins. Displacement of timing, the chaos theory. When we dissect Lucifer's original lie in heaven, I have God's goodness, we can observe that this actually reflects Lucifer's hidden desire because I want to obtain God's goodness. Having God's goodness and wanting God's goodness are two different places and times. This is the displacement of timing. Specifically, Lucifer's curse was switching the present perfect tense wanting with the present progressive tense of having. Pretending to have something in the present perfect moment when it actually belongs in the present progressive inherently results in false pride because it short circuits the true pursuit in the present perfect moment of becoming. After all, why bother pursuing something you already have? Lucifer's false pride is integrated with Eve's true pride. Eve took the statement she knew to be true, "You will not surely die," and bargained it for the statement that she knew to be false, "Will be like God," and then switched her present perfect state, "I am like God," with the present progressive state, "I will be like God," by biting the fruit. Her biting the fruit is an act of faith in God's goodness. Unbeknownst to Eve, as a result of her goodwill in biting the fruit in faith, she has also planted the seed of hope in reversing Lucifer's timing displacement curse from "I have God's goodness" into "I will have God's goodness" in the present progressive tense. By falling for Satan's deceit, she was actually falling with Lucifer's suffering, in hopes that one day both Lucifer and Eve may return to the state of being like God again. By falling together, Satan's temptation transforms into Lucifer's hope of redemption. Through the mirror darkly, both Lucifer and Eve receives the hope of self-realization required to step into the prophetic statement of "will be like God," which is to know good and evil, and still choose to act on good. What is evil? Evil disregards divine will and the truth. Evil is created by the positional displacement of truth and timing. Opposing evil. The best way to oppose evil is to replace evil with good, along the key points of the timeline and storyline of its rippling effects. When evil occurs, there is a domino effect that transforms space-time along the timeline and states of being of matters affected in a series of incidences that make up a storyline. The best way to oppose evil is through a timing replacement counter curse along the timeline and a positional replacement counter curse along the storyline. Both counter curses work together in congruence to oppose the effects of evil by replacing the false statement with the true statement. The replacement happens when the truth becomes self-evident and the individual chooses to act on that evidence of the truth rather than the lie. In Eve's fallen state, she has embodied the mirror, a timing replacement countercurse that directly opposes Lucifer's timing displacement curse. Her first countercurse is in the form of a positional replacement of the lie that Eve will become like God with the noble shadow, which is the truth. The snake deceived me. Fallen Eve. Being called out. The silver lining of exposure. She now is able to see the evil intention of the snake wanting her to bite. Eve's exposure of Lucifer's alchemized shadow Satan as a deceiver exposes Satan. This exposure reverses the effects of the original lie and sends shockwaves to Lucifer's psyche while weakening Satan's stronghold over Lucifer. In that moment, Lucifer became self-aware that he has a duality within himself, that of Satan and Lucifer, and that both exists within him. Satan and Lucifer are two sides of the same coin. This is the awakened serpent. The blessings of Eve's fall. Self-awareness is the first step in breaking a curse, but self-awareness can only be discovered through a mirror darkly. Eve serves as a mirror darkly for Lucifer to see himself, because the truth, good and evil, spirit and shadow, yang and yin, is the only way Lucifer can begin freeing himself from Satan. Then the Lord God said to the woman, "What is this you have done?" The woman said, "The serpent deceived me, and I ate." Genesis 3:13, New International Version. De-alchemizing the alchemized shadow. The state of Satan Lucifer before Eve fell. I have God's goodness. Alchemized shadow, the lie. The state of Satan Lucifer after Eve fell. I have not God's goodness. Noble shadow, the truth. The awakened serpent. This is the awakened serpent. He is awakened because he can finally see the noble shadow within himself. The ability to see one's own noble shadow within oneself is the process of illuminating one's shadow and is the beginning of shadow integration. The winged serpent. The power of the present progressive tense. The present progressive tense is an action that is happening now and is continuing to happen. Eve's hope is that both Lucifer and Eve will be like God, together, in time. This is her position when she bit the fruit. In real time, this is the reality of the present progressive state of every human being. To know good and evil and begin choosing good in every present perfect moment of possibility. The process of shadow integration is continuing in real time, in reality, in present perfect and present progressive tenses. Grace is in the fulcrum of time. Time is a container of tension and is a boundary that binds matter in action in relationship with other matters in action. Time has a beginning, middle, and end. The period in the middle is the fulcrum, also known as the grace period. The grace period is always experienced in the present perfect moment of time. This grace period is the collective moment-by-moment decisions made by each divine matter. This grace period is designed for each divine matter to experience the presence and absence of love in a series of incidences that are made up of tensions developed by many matters acting, each with their own paths, pursuits, and ways of being. The fulcrum of time was created from the moment Eve fell into the serpent's world, and each of Eve's offspring now has the ability to see duality in space-time during this grace period. Grace is the choice that Eve chose when she bit, and so the fulcrum of time is always in the present perfect moment of being and the present progressive moment of becoming. The problem with hell is that the fire doesn't consume you, the fires of transformation do. Joseph Campbell. Fallen Eve's evil eye. When Eve fell and became fallen Eve, she found herself in the same place and state as the snake. She saw herself through Satan's perspective of her, and she had forgotten her original perspective of herself and of God. She is now able to see the evil intention of the snakes wanting her to bite. She had forgotten her original focus on her own goodness and of God's goodness behind her biting the fruit. With the newfound ability to see and focus on evil, she became worried and overwhelmed when she saw Satan's deception. Satan's deception was so foreign to her, you could say that she was shocked by the existence of deception. More so, she became aware of how Satan viewed her as weak, vulnerable, simple-minded, and easily manipulated. The fall of Eve began when she started believing in Satan's lies of her through the lens of weak, foolish, and naive. Eve can now see through the lens of shadow and spirit. With this newfound power to see in the dark, she could also see Satan's misuse of his power, transforming knowledge into manipulation. Compared to the cunning Satan, she knew she was not good enough in intellect and wit. The first question that God asked Eve after she bit the fruit was, "What is this you have done?" She had dismissed her own good will in why she had bitten the fruit in the first place, and instead shifted her focus from her goodness to the snake's badness. Rather than answering God truthfully about her own good intention behind why she had bitten the fruit, her new eye, the shadow eye, had her focus on the serpent's deception of her. The sin of omission. What is this you have done, God? Genesis 3:13, New International Version. Eve's statement, "The snake deceived me," is true, but what's false is what she left out, which is her faith in God's goodness in the reason why she bit. We call this the sin of omission. False humility. The act of hiding one's own goodness and then shifting the focus from good to evil creates false humility. Eve's omitting her goodness when God asked her what she has done created an imbalance in her self-perception. Eve experienced false humility, which is the act of hiding one's goodness from oneself. Eve gave too much credit to the snake and not enough credit towards her own goodwill and good faith. The statement, "The snake deceived me," is true, but it is not the full truth. The sin of omission created a life lie within Eve. She had forgotten the true power of her design. She had dismissed her own fierce, crazy faith in God's goodness, and then lied to herself by omitting that her act of humility was good, and instead equated her humility in biting the fruit with humiliation. The three shifts in focus that caused Eve's fall. Number 1, fallen Eve believed her humility was humiliating. For the first time, she had experienced shame. Shame that kept her feeling weighed down, preventing her from expressing her true gifts for fear of being humiliated. Number 2, fallen Eve shifted her focus from faith to fear. For the first time, she had also experienced blame. Knowing evil, specifically knowing the serpent's deceit, shifted the emphasis from God's goodness to Satan's evil, thereby giving more creative power to evil in the form of criticism, judgment, and delighting in evil. Number 3, fallen Eve valued manipulation over mindfulness. Fallen Eve deceived herself by valuing the manipulation of knowledge higher than meditating on knowledge. As a result of the latter, fallen Eve experienced envy for the snake's cunning, wit, and charm. She had forgotten her righteous position inside the power of love. Instead, she redirected her focus on wanting to obtain what the serpent has, which is cunningness, manipulation, and false charm. Thus, fallen Eve began developing a covetous eye for these things. Fallen Eve is now Maya, the state of perpetual illusion. Fallen Eve inverted true humility, does not delight in evil, but rejoices with the truth. With false humility, does delight in evil, but rejoices not with the truth. God judged this not good. Before apple bite, Eve's true humility. I bit because I have faith in God's goodness. Lucifer's true humility. I bit because I doubt God's goodness. Positive valence. After apple bite, fallen Eve's false humility. I bit because the snake deceived me. Positive valence. Lucifer's false humility. I bit because I have God's goodness. Negative valence. Eve's false humility mirroring Lucifer's false humility through parallel timing and positional opposite valences. Eve's false humility. I bit because the snake deceived me. This is a positive valence because it reflects the noble shadow, the ugly truth. However, this costs Eve's humility because Eve dismisses her own goodness in answering God's question, "What have you done?" In other words, Eve did not fully answer God's question because she omitted her goodness in the biting. Lucifer's false humility. I bit because I have God's goodness. Negative valence. Lucifer inflates his own goodness to justify why God offered him the fruit of knowledge. They are now locked in parallel dualities in timing and polar dualities in states of being. Fallen Eve is the inspiration behind Lucifer's shadow illumination, the awakened serpent, by helping him de-alchemize his alchemized shadow state when he acknowledges his own noble shadow within. The phoenix. Eve is the phoenix that directly opposes the dragon. When Lucifer heard Eve tell God, "The snake deceived me," it was the beginning of Lucifer's spell breaking because Eve called out Lucifer's noble shadow when she had the ability to see evil. Fallen Eve is not only gifted with the tree of life's power to produce everlasting life, the most coveted gift among all creation under God, but she also has the wisdom of the serpent when she bit from the fruit of knowledge. Eve was born with the potential to hold the vast wisdom inside the tree of knowledge, but with the fruit of everlasting life as its first foundation. Eve now knows how to dance and integrate with the devil. In certain mythologies where the bird and the serpent symbols are synthesized, you have the image of the dragon as a winged serpent. The winged lizard is a synthesis of the two. You can have either the attack and the separation, or the synthesis. But to arrive at the synthesis, one has to go through the separation. We will see Joyce working out this symbolism, actually alchemical symbolism. Stephen himself will synthesize the serpent image with that of the bird, the fall with the rise, when he experiences the girl on the beach as a dove, her eyes calling him to live, to err, to fall, to triumph, to recreate life out of life. Joseph Campbell. Eve is learning the snake while the snake is learning her. The more they are learning each other, the more self-aware they are becoming, creating a reverse negative feedback loop when, in synthesis, spirals upwards while spiraling downwards. This is the anodos within the kathodos, or the spiraling up within the spiraling down, the hope within the heart of darkness. After Eve fell, her power as a producer of everlasting life was not taken away. On the contrary, she gained an extra power. From the fruit of knowledge, she now has the ability to discern good from bad, and she retained the power to produce everlasting life. For by grace you have been saved through faith, and from you this did not come. It's not by works, it's a gift from God, so no boasting can be done. Ephesians 2:8, the poetic scriptures of Paul, translated directly from Greek and interpreted in rhythm and rhyme. The integration of shadow and spirit within both fallen Lucifer and fallen Eve requires 3 steps in producing the counter curse to their respective curses. The first step is by illuminating the noble shadow within. The second step is creating a counter curse statement from the noble shadow statement by creating the timing, parallel, and positional opposite statement to the noble shadow statement. The third step is to act on the counter curse statement, which will reverse the effects of the curse. When the counter curse is acted upon, the journal artist will be living in grace and living one's truest purpose, thus reversing the effects of the curse by creating new affects from the counter curse, while discovering and living out one's true purpose. I am sending you out like sheep among wolves. Therefore, be as shrewd as snakes and as innocent as doves. Matthew 10:16, New International Version. We are now all living in the present progressive tense of the prophetic hope in the aftermath of Eve's biting the fruit of knowledge. Will be like God. To be like God is to know good and evil and still choose good.